how was the drive home?
It was pretty good, actually. It wasn't as hot as I thought it was going to be. So that was always nice. The weather over here in western Montana, the forecast called for a really hot day and actually wasn't quite as hot. So that made the drive a little more bearable since my AC went out in my rig.
Where were you over at?
Over near Kalispell. If you're familiar with that area. Yep. I actually work for an outfitter out of that area.
Oh,
Cody
right on. What's the outfitter?
Outfitting. Cody Carr.
Right on.
Yep. So he's actually a pretty big outfitter in western Montana, and he does all sorts of hunts: deer, elk, mountain lion, you name it, just about everything. And he actually, as of this year, since Montana, the legislators in Montana recently passed bear hunting with the use of hounds, he hired on a couple guys for that, and we can get into that later. But yeah, I ended up working for him a little bit this year.
Right on.
Yeah.
How far of a drive home is it for you?
Oh, about a 45-minute drive, so it's a little jaunt, but I mean, that's just living in Montana. Everywhere you go happens to be a jaunt.
Right. Well, I should probably introduce you before we go too far, because I think this is going to be an interesting podcast. Like, we should have just recorded the hour-long phone conversation we had.
Man, probably.
But this is Aaron Kelly, and he had reached out to us a while ago. I mean, really early on in your hound career, right? As far as podcast and being a listener. And then things went kind of crazy. You got busy, and we just kind of reconnected, and you had an idea. And I think that this is going to be really good for the listeners of all stages. We've got our beginner, novice houndsmen. We've got the guys and gals that have been in it for, let's say that middle experience range. And then you've got the dyed-in-the-wool guys that have been doing this forever. But I think this is going to be really good. But before we get into too much, I really want to talk about your early start, because you're real recent into hounds, right?
Oh, yeah. So I think I reached out to you in actually January of this year. And that was just after. Yeah. And that was, I only had one hound at the time. I'd got a blue tick pup in December of 21, and yeah, I was just kind of lost in the sauce, and I'm like, man, I don't know where to start. So I got into the books, found a couple podcasts, and really liked this one. So yeah, I reached out kind of because I had what I thought was a pretty young and young but instinctual pup. So like when I say that, it seemed like that pup kind of just had a natural ability. Mm-hmm. And so I was just kind of like, man, I don't want to ruin this dog. So I need to learn as much as I can, because I have no idea where I'm even going with this. And listen to you guys. I listen to you guys. I hear one word often, and that's having them train wrecks. The use of that word. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying anything against you, Jason.
Hey, I have more than my fair share over the years.
Oh yeah. But I was just one of those things for me was, man, I know I'll have lots of train wrecks through this journey, but how can I mitigate those as best as possible? Yeah. And so that's kind of why I reached out to you in the first place. And like you said, life got real busy, just on the military side of things. I'm in the Army National Guard. So things got pretty busy on that end, and you know how life gets, just things hit you, blindside you a lot. And so, but it's been quite the journey, since then. yeah, I've just kind of had to embrace every moment of it so far.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, I mean, really, it got crazy busy for you in a very good way when it came to the dogs. And you kind of had, I mean, just in our talking over the phone, you had the year that the guys in that novice area, that novice class, I would say, like we all wanted to be, or they're there right now. And you are one of the very few people I've ever talked to that it was like you came out and things happened to line up and everything was really going great. And you found a really obscure issue with that I think a lot of people overlook and they don't think about it. It's like they finally hit the big time where, like it's solid. They're going out, they're going catching, they got confidence. And you took that and you really looked at it retrospectively and realized you put it a very good way. And I'm trying to remember the exact verbiage you used, but you were saying like you had missed out on some of the learning points, but it was able to help you reflect on others that you possibly would have missed. Yeah, it just kind of gave you a different perspective, which I thought was it's really cool to hear people when they start analyzing and getting into the deeper meanings. I nerd out on it. Like that's my thing is there's always questions of why. Why did this happen? Why did the dog do this? What can I do to better our odds or correct this issue? So
absolutely.
When you just started with those 2 pups, you said, right? And you had 1 finished dog.
Yep. So, after listening to a lot of your podcasts and listening to guests that you guys had, I started kind of deducing some things and realizing like, and along with your podcasts, it was, reading books like Trained by a Hound Dog by Ed Vance, and realizing that you can start a pack of dogs, and you can have a finished like phenomenal product, what with just training them from the ground up. But I was kind of like, man, I'd like to start, get into this a little bit more, quicker. And I just don't have time to raise, a bunch of pups from the ground up. And so I reached out to a friend who happened to have an older plot dog, pup trainer. And he's like, hey man, like this pup trainer is gonna really help you along, and get those pups kind of straight lining for you. And so I was like all ears, ready to hop on that because, like I said, listening to you guys, and reading those books, it's like a well finished dog is instrumental, in helping younger pups that haven't quite figured it out. And so I went over to Butte, Montana, if you know where that's at, and picked up that plot dog. It was a 7-year-old plot dog named Tink. Goofiest plot dog you ever meet, man. I tell you what, you mention that dog's name, and boy, that dog would just start barking like crazy, like I'm ready to go. And some people might not like a dog like that, but I just loved it. It just added a unique personality to the mix. But yeah, we it was just those 3 dogs come April 15th, the beginning of bear season. And
now, could I pause you? Was he an experienced bear dog before, or was he like a finished lion dog that you were trying to switch over?
Oh yeah, I guess I should mention that. So this dog had been on, apparently from what my buddy told me, this dog had been on hundreds of bears and quite a few lions too. So it real finished in both regard, like in regard to lion and bear. So I was pretty stoked, needless to say, that I was adding this dog to my pack. Now the only thing with this dog was she was definitely she did climb trees, so she'd have her faults, right? Some guys just can't stand a dog that'll climb a tree.
That's the worst.
yeah, so I think that was kind of a reason I got a deal on her, because he just didn't like the fact that she climbed trees.
Yeah.
And that messed her joints up too. It made her, a 7-year-old dog, kind of act like a 10, 12, 11, 12-year-old dog, so that was a little tough. I couldn't run her every day, but I could run her for as much as I needed. So yeah, she was real well finished dog on both bear and lion. And I took her out on April 15th, being the opener for the bear season. And I realized, after running these roads, that I'm like, I don't know, I don't got dogs that I know of that can strike, and I, here I am kind of just trying my hand and kind of probably producing getting ready to produce a train wreck. Just, that's my style. I just kind of go ahead into things sometimes, and I realized, I'm like, man, I'm not getting any strikes. But then I started asking around, and a lot of the locals that had real good cat dogs, they were kind of telling me that, this is going to be really easy for them. They got well-trained cat dogs, so going into bear, they should have no problem, right? Mm-hmm. And few days in, you start hearing, man, I just these bears aren't moving around, and I'm sure that when it comes to early bear season, the bears don't move around as much, as compared to late May, early June. But sure, it went season to show me, right, that some of these guys who thought that they're good lion dogs could just pick up bear hunting like nothing weren't. Like they were having some serious issues. And it kind of showed me, I'm like, okay, well, I'm doing the same thing as these guys, driving around these roads and hoping to strike a bear. I got to adapt. I got to try something different. And it wasn't until my buddy Jake Calloway and I started free casting our dogs, which is, as just kind of hiking around in the woods, side hilling or finding a trailhead and just kind of walking them dogs off the leash, that we started experiencing some success. Like I said, one of the first bears of the year, I took my three dogs out, and that goofy old Plot, Tink, started going up the hill, wagging her tail, head down, and all of a sudden she started blowing up, and those two pups were running right behind her, and they blew up too. And mind you, my pups had never seen a bear, and I didn't do any raccoon training or anything like that. Just all drags, bear scent and stuff like that. And before I knew it, man, these dogs were on a race, and they are all together. But what was kind of funny to me was, when you're in that point in a race, when your dogs jump the animal, when you get that frenzied barking, if you're close enough to hear them, or your GPS, sometimes, it could look like a hook, like a sharp hook or a turn. And it helps if you got a handheld that gives you a bark indicator too. Anyways, I was at a point in that first race where I knew they jumped that bear, because all the dogs just got into this frenzied barking, right? Almost like when they get to a tree, you can, some dogs just have a different treed bark to them, right? They're a little more frenzied. They see that animal, or they can really smell that animal extra hot. And these dogs just were frenzied. And so at that point, I realized, okay, something's a little going on with my pups. Both my pups, I had a younger blue tick and a young leopard cur, and they're both under a year. They started bouncing, back and forth. They go 100 yards, 50 yards away from my Plot dog, and then they'd come back in for a little bit and bark and then bounce out. And so it was showing me that they were kind of unsure or hesitant
sure
of what was going on. And like I said, they're under a year, so some guys might not even put their dogs out on a bear race.
right
If their dogs are under a year, and that's totally okay. It's just I think a lot of guys it's kind of by preference, but and what they like to do. But for me, I was willing to kind of gamble a little bit and see if these pups had what it took. And a mile later, that bear was treed. Now I didn't have those pups; any of the pups weren't on it, but that goofy old plot, she had that thing treed, and my pups were within a couple hundred yards of it. So it was definitely a pretty interesting first race, but the first bear, and I think a really important bear for those pups in their progression. Because even though they didn't really completely finish that race, they got to smell and see that bear running through the woods, and I think that's just a super important piece of the puzzle for any young dogs, is seeing that game running through the woods. The target game, and so it was kind of a couple races similar to that, about 3 that finally got me to the point, got those dogs to the point and where something clicked with both of those pups. We're like, hey, these bears aren't as bad as we thought. We haven't had a mean bear yet, so everything's good, and
yeah, it's all hunky dory.
Yeah, it was all hunky dory for those pups, and they were, and they clicked and they were dialed in. And after, on my 4th race of the year, from that 4th race on, they started finishing and at times leading every one of my races.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was something that, like, a lot of this too, Jason, was some serious luck, because I'm talking to you right now as a still very green, very novice houndsman, that I'll be the first to admit I do not know much, but I know something. So, kind of thing. So
you got something pretty special going on, really.
Oh, absolutely. I got very lucky in the pup department, as far as, dogs that were picking up things quickly, and didn't require a ton of groundwork and a ton of exposure, because some dogs, it takes that to get them going.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it was definitely a quick start as far as, like, my PAX progression. And it wasn't until a little later in the season, about the beginning of May, I had probably already treated, just with those 3 dogs, like 14 or 15 bear. And this was like 2nd week of May. And I'm like, man, I'd kind of like to, try my hand at, guiding some people on some hunts. I can go out now and dialed in. I'd like to give it a shot. We got a good bear population over in this area. But then I started realizing, well, there are some mean bears out there, and it'd be nice to have a couple, other dogs in the mix. And so I went down to Arizona and picked up one was a started black and tan, and the other two mostly finished dogs, right? I'd consider one kind of a started black and tan, and one dog was a finished plot dog. And I got this guy, former outfitter, was kind of getting out of everything. And he's like, hey man, I'll cut you a deal. He saw a post of mine online, and I'm like, yeah, I'll come down and pick him up. And so I went down there, picked up two pretty decent dogs, and came back, and word kind of got around that I was kind of thinking about guiding. And like I said, Cody Carr reached out and was like, hey man, willing to give you a shot. Would you want to do some part-time guiding this year? And I'm like, absolutely. I'm jumping at the opportunity. And so I think the third week of May I started for it. No, it was, yeah, about the third week of May. He signed me on, and I took my first client out, and had an absolute blast. I didn't know if I was gonna hate it, if I was gonna love it. You know, it was kind of one of those things like I want to kind of dip my toes in the water on this. You know, just see if it's something I enjoy doing. And I had an absolute blast. We went out with a client from Utah, and he wanted to shoot a bear with a bow. And so, you know, some houndsmen, that's a definite no. They don't like it. But here I am. I told you I'm young, right? So I'm a little more risky and than I should be, I think. And so I'm, you know, as a risk taker, I agreed. I'm like, yep, just make sure, you know, I gave him the whole rundown. Make sure to let me, you know, tie my dogs back and assess the tree before we really make any kind of decision. And I told him, and I brought in a rifle just in case, right? I wanted just to, you know, at least if he couldn't shoot it with his bow, he'd come away with a nice bear with a rifle. And so we started on an early morning, kind of in the middle of May, and he was super stoked. He had never been out like on a I guess on a hunt with the use of hounds, right? So he was super stoked just to see the dogs, and you know, just kind of curious too about it all. He was like, man,
that's cool.
I'd like to kind of see how you guys work with each dog. He thought it was super cool that I could be like, oh, yep, that's Mabel, that's Tink back there. You know, he thought it was super cool that I could pick out each dog just distinctly by their bark.
People are always blown away by that. You know, like us as houndsmen, we're like, what's the difference? You know your kid's voice. Like you just got to spend the time with it. But everybody I've ever talked to, they think I have hound dog or Tourette's. You know, somebody whines in the kennel and you know who it is. That's cool. So he got a really cool first look at hounds, and he was an open-minded guy. Like, I mean, obviously he's on a hound hunt, but with no exposure before, that's pretty cool to hear.
Oh yeah, no, he was all about it. Him and his buddy he actually brought his brother along for the hunt, and they just both thought it was the coolest thing ever. Just being able to be out there. They were dog guys anyway, though. You know, they had their house dogs. They loved having, you know, they loved having dogs around, and what they found super interesting was the fact that I was so invested into each dog. And I think most houndsmen are, you know, most good houndsmen out there are going to be invested into each one of their dogs. And I'm just, I might be a little overly invested into each one of them, but I'm a sucker for dogs. So, but yeah, we started early in the morning, and you know, I was kind of this is my first hunt, right? So I'm nervous, you know. I'm like, man, I don't know how this is gonna go. These dogs have been doing good, and I've been kind of talking them up.
There wasn't a paycheck on it before.
Yeah, no, I was definitely feeling the pressure, and not a peep out of these dogs. Like for the first several hours, I'm like, oh, this is and then, you know, then they're starting to ask questions about, oh, so like, do the dogs normally not make any noise? And I'm like, well, you know, it just kind of depends. If there's been bear in the area, usually they're a little more talkative, and we'd be hearing them. But yeah, it just doesn't seem like there might have been much movement. You know, just trying to kind of come up with, you know, and speculate on, you know, why those dogs might not be really sounding off or picking up anything. Because, you know, the dogs I was running, they're fairly cold nosed, right? So if you got a bear on top of a ridge and you're going down that creek bottom, and there's a bear on the adjacent ridge line, you know, a lot of times they could win it. If the wind's in the right direction, they'll win that sucker, right? Yeah. So they'll pick it up. It might not be the strongest strike in the world because they still got to work that where they're picking that bear up from. But, you know, they'll kind of sound off with something. And that wasn't even happening. But I turned around, and this is where the novice in me really comes out, playing the wind and all that, because just turning around, and it could have been something as easy as, this bear across the road, but turning around, we got to the top of this ridgeline, we turned around, we were probably about 7 miles back in there in the woods, turned around and started heading back down, because at the time there's still quite a bit of snow up in the mountains, and you can't make it way back in the backcountry unless you got like a sled or something. And on our way back down, those dogs just blew up, just absolute frenzied, good strike, good hot strike.
Covered ground. So, you just drove over it.
Right. And so I'm like, I was kind of mentioning to the client, I'm like, hey man, like, you will know, like, when these dogs sound off, it ain't gonna, especially on a good strike, like, they're not gonna give us a little bits of bark in here and there, or something like an uninterested bark. Like, if it's a good strike, they're gonna be frenzied. They're gonna be invested into that strike, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I don't know the correct terminology, but that's kind of how I described it to him. And he's like, okay, yeah, I think I'll be able to tell. And sure enough, those dogs popped off, and he looked at me and he's like that, and I'm like, yep, like that. And so we got out and we got out and let those dogs go, and the rest is history, right? They lined out real quick, went up over a couple different ridge tops and into a couple drainage, a pretty thick drainage a few miles away, and ended up showing up treed. So we just had to kind of take a look at our map and figure out what was the best way to get in there, and we made it happen. But we ended up getting in there, and there was a beautiful big old brown phase black bear in a pretty thick Douglas fir tree, and this thing, it measured out at 6'7" nose to tail, so Wow. It was a decent bear, real decent bear. And he shot it with his bow, which made it that much cooler too. Made an awesome shot. We got up to the tree. Yep. Got up to the tree, made an awesome shot, clean, ethical shot. And that bear, which, it's always nice when you take any kind of risk that it ends up like that. Right. It was a really awesome first experience for me as far as like guiding went. But like I mentioned, I just kind of did it part-time because to me, I enjoy just chasing more than harvesting. Right. And you also I kind of have that line of thinking where, the less game that I'm harvesting or helping harvest, right, the more opportunity it will be to chase that game. Right. So, and I did I was part of harvesting a few bears this spring season, but a lot of it was just, I was in it for the chase. So, that's kind of where my pack
You go harvesting them, like a lot of those. I was wondering how that season would go out there for you guys. Because I heard the same thing. You talk to a lot of people in this business. And,
right.
I think that switch from lion dogs to running bears was a lot harder on guys than they expected. Which, yeah. I mean, I've lived that firsthand. Trying to change game species, it's a lot harder than a guy would think.
100%.
It's crazy to me that the old dogs coming in, I'm sure there were a pile of them coming in from out of state for guys to get some experienced dogs, because you guys have never had a bear season for hounds.
No.
This is like new. Do you guys, when did this season end? It was April 15th through,
so there's kind of two dates to think of here. You have May 25th, and that's where it ends, as far as harvesting of black bears for houndsmen only, right? Specifically. Okay. The season, we then can continue to hunt until, or I should say chase.
Pursue.
Right? Pursue until June 15th. There's a 2-week training period at the end of the season for houndsmen. Meanwhile, spot and stalkers, right, can continue to harvest until June 15th.
Gotcha.
So
it'll be interesting to see what the numbers are, like how they ended up, like the hounds versus still hunters. Because can you bait there?
No,
you can't, right?
No, thankfully. I mean, I guess everybody has their opinions. I personally like the fact that you can't bait, but you know, and maybe that's just me because I haven't been exposed to it, right? I have no idea how it is hunting with baits, and but I kind of just like the fact of, to me, it's a little bit more of a fair chase, maybe, when you're out and about and you're not like driving to a specific point. But
sure,
that's just me. Everybody has their preference.
Everybody has to make that call. I mean, like everybody sets their own moral compass. And
yep.
It's like the States, I know that they can bait. Like I actually came from a baiting family here in Oregon. We didn't run dogs except for, I had my great uncle and stuff. I found out later, but to use that as an opportunity. I know I've talked with Ross a ton, Elwanger, about it. It's like, man, that is the perfect setup for training season. Like you could ask for to get opportunities and this and that. But I on the flip side, I see where you're coming from. There's something more primal about it in some people's eyes.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I have no qualms or issues with the use of of a bait site, but it kind of made it nice, I guess, for around here, because it's just, I guess, one less way to harvest a black bear, because at least some of the I guess some of the people I've talked to in the panhandle of Idaho, they've kind of mentioned that there's just a ton of people that use baits over there, and so it kind of almost saturates the hunting area, I feel like. But like I said, it's unless you kind of experience it, you can't really talk much on it. So that's kind of just probably where I stand with it. I just have to kind of experience it before I could really say a whole lot on it. But I'd give it a shot, I'm sure.
Yeah. So everything, this year, it was going smooth. You ended up, if you want to share numbers, you can. But I know you had mentioned a number, what you guys caught in that basically month that you were running. Is that about what the time frame is?
So it was actually a little over a month. It was actually the whole up until that wolf incident I mentioned to you. So it was actually basically the whole bear season. I'd end up chasing and treeing 29 bears, which is for me. I'm like, wow, that's a lot more than I thought I was actually ever gonna come close to catching.
For sure.
But I think a lot of it was, though, to be honest with you, Jason, it was definitely some beginner's luck. There's a ton of things that fell in place for someone like me, who's very, very much so a novice, to have a season like that. I just think certain situations on days that I happened to be out and about in the woods with my dogs just kept lining up and making it that much easier for a pack like mine to hit that number. Like I said, there was one day where I'm like, I don't even know this was in April when I still just had the 3 before going down to Arizona and getting those other 2. I was out and about, and I decided I'm going to go do some shed hunting, look for some sheds, but I'll collar up the dogs, and I'm going to side hill through here. And you know what? If we get on a bear, we get on a bear. And I was definitely thinking, probably not a good chance of it. But I'm not 15 minutes into looking for a shed. And the dogs just all took off barking like crazy. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go, and it was so nice. And in a way, I really have to give a lot of credit where it's due. And that's actually to that goofy old plot that I had. Because of her, I was able to, when those dogs took off, right, she was so well finished and not very trashy. Every dog sometimes will have a day, but she was so broke of trash, it seemed, that I just never, it was never a question like, is that a good rate? So and as a novice, you don't get that opportunity a lot, I don't think. Usually that's something that you train up to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, a lot of my success this bear season came from that pup trainer. Undoubtedly, like a dog that enables you to be like, as long as they go, it's good. That's a huge process of getting your dogs to chasing a bear successfully. That I had, a huge process of that was basically taken out of the equation, right? Everything leading up to,
sure.
That whole part of, are they trash broke? Are they gonna, kind of flare off and chase something different because they're getting uninterested?
You kind of skip that step,
right? Because that pup trainer, that old Tink dog I had, she just kind of kept those dogs in line, like, hey, this is what we're chasing, and those pups, they really trusted her and stuck with her, and they got to see a ton of bears because of it. And like I said, they even, how I mentioned she was kind of a tree climber and her joints were stiff, and
mm-hmm.
well, those pups got to a point about, how I'd say it's probably about middle of May when I'm taking clients out, where they were at times leading the races, right? They were, especially that blue tick I had was just, she was a dog from the time I got her all the way back in December. I'd go out in the middle of a blizzard, and she'd run off 50 yards sniffing around, just naturally very curious, and just super independent. And I feel like that, if you can get a handle on an independent dog, they're just going to be one of your better dogs. And she was, and she, like I said, she was leading races, well into the end of the bear season. So it was just kind of, everything just kind of panned out. Had an awesome pup trainer. The dogs learned quickly, added two pretty solid dogs into the mix, and achieving that number of 29 bears, really, when I think about it, was because of just having a dog that really taught me a ton, man. Like I was sitting back, all I did was, I fed him, I pointed him in the right direction, kind of thing, as much as you can, right? Right. I'm the taxi. I'm like, okay, there's going to be bears in the woods. All right, Tink, do the work, right? So, I was really just kind of sitting along for the ride, and really being trained by a hound dog, right? Like mm-hmm. Advance puts it, they are the ones that will oftentimes be the ones teaching you. And so that's kind of how that season went for me. Just a lot of riding along and learning as much as I could from those finished dogs, and even from my pups. I mean, they kind of help give me some insight on things that pups are learning along the way.
Oh yeah. Well, and like we were talking, it can be done. Just get a pup and start. But I guess the easy way for me to put it is, when you got a couple of novices, I mean, it's hard enough to take two puppies and put them together, and have them figure stuff out. You go train and throw in a handler that's a novice and a dog that doesn't know anything. I mean, you are leaps and bounds ahead if you can find something like Tink. Find something to at least get the momentum going. The natural instinct and things will take over, and then you can emphasize that, and you can tailor, pay attention to that dog, and eventually you'll start seeing what they need on an individual basis. But man, you just shave out so much time and fuel and frustration. And, I guess it all comes with a different set. You're kind of opening Pandora's box there, like every different situation. But I would encourage most new guys getting into it. Like, that is really your best option, is to find something that can help train those dogs with you. Because you think back, like, you've talked a lot about Ed. I mean, you think about Ed and Van Johnson and Warner Glenn and like all these Dale Lee brother, or the Lee brothers, and those guys weren't hunting on weekends. And I think that there's such an unrealistic goal that's put out there, especially for, how do I say this nicely? And I don't mean to offend anybody by this, but like the novice level of houndsman, we're in a different class, I think. Like, if you're going to have your hierarchy, there's guys like the Lee brothers and Warner Glenn. They were out there every single day. It was a way of life. It was a necessity in life for them to continue, ranching in some cases, or guiding. It was the means to a life. Most of us have 9-to-5 jobs, right? Yep. I mean, it's how the world is. If you're not independently wealthy, you're not going to have the time to dedicate. That's how those guys made those dogs. It is not hunting once or twice a week. It is not hunting during season and then they sit the rest of the year without being touched. It was a daily contact with those dogs. And if you can't dedicate that level, you can't expect those results. I think you are one person that got extremely lucky, and combine that with your ambition and your objectiveness to everything that was going on. That was a winning ticket for you. And it gave you a real good look at the broader spectrum of this whole world of hounds. Because I'm sure, like, you've heard all the train wrecks. I wish we could get a whole episode, just like a cut episode. Here's a chunk in train wrecks, best of kind of deal. Because we all have them. Mm-hmm. But it's that point that you start getting discouraged. I know you and I were talking a couple days ago, or yesterday, I think. And we were talking about that time period where the newness is worn off. Like, the honeymoon's over. It's time to get gritty. And you're either going to get gritty with it or you're going to quit. The it factor, let's say. As a houndsman, that is a rough place to be. I teetered on that edge for so long. I mean, like 4 or 5 years of like, dude, I just need to hang this up. I am beating my head against a wall. I don't have it. This is not going to work out. And then something happened. And I don't know if there's one thing I could attribute that to, but there were a combination of events that just really made me look at it differently. And you realize, like, you can't hold yourself to a standard that you have no way of having the exposure to get to that level.
Well, and I think that's
just keeping a dog tuned up that's at that level and performing. Like, if you can't do it, I'll tell you, it makes you feel bad. Mine are sitting, and it's killing me because I know I'm not giving them their fair shake.
Right. But I think a lot of it comes down to what you already mentioned too, Jason, is coming to the realization that, like, hey, a lot of us houndsmen out there, or even us novices that are just getting started, or just can't break through some kind of plateau, right? We have to realize that we don't have that time, right? Because I think that one of the most important ingredients in developing hounds, and this is just my personal belief, is it's time and an exposure for your dogs that are going to be like a huge recipe to success. And it's like you said, the more you're out there, the more your dogs are out there, the better your odds of getting to that end goal, or just even making progress, right? And I think a lot of it too is just kind of you have to be a realist, right? You kind of have to be like, hey, man, like, this is the time I have. So you can't, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you can't have like unrealistic expectations, right?
Like you set the bar.
Right. And I don't know. That's just kind of how I continue to motivate myself. If I'm not hearing, from another houndsman, like, hey man, like keep your chin up. These things happen. I have to kind of tell myself, and develop that mental toughness. Just like, hey, like things aren't going to always go your way. Now, I'm, like you said, I was a unique case, this bear season, just getting from point A to point B because of that pup trainer I had, a phenomenal pup trainer. But I will tell you that with a bunch of success, it can kind of blind you to things. And that's kind of what happened to me, right? So I was just on this awesome roller coaster of a ride at times that was it was exhilarating and humbling, because I had made so much progress only to have a lot of it come crashing down. And that was on June 11th, actually. And this is what I mentioned to you earlier, Jason, with that wolf incident. I'm having the success, counting the numbers. Like, okay, that's bear number 25. Let's hit 30 before the season ends, right? And I'm going out there on a rainy day. I'm like, oh, these bears, they've treed so many. This rainy day ain't gonna be nothing. We're gonna tree a couple bears. And we had actually treed 2 bears, 2 smaller, about 5-foot bears, and we ended up getting up to taking this old skid trail road. And unbeknownst to us, there was some logging equipment on it. So we were like, oh, okay, we got to turn around. If we strike a bear, on the way out, we'll let the dogs go. Let's get one more. Let's get another bear. And so I'm like, yeah, let's do it.
It's always that last one. Of
course, the dogs.
Just so you know, for future, it's always the last one.
Oh man, yeah, and it definitely was. So we let those dogs out, and it's actually kind of funny because these dogs, and I don't know if you've experienced this, Jason, but on a real red hot bear, sometimes I feel like the dogs, even a good dog, will backtrack at least a little bit, right? They'll shoot off the road, and you're like, okay, we got a race going. And then, 100, 200, 300 yards, depends, right? All of a sudden those dogs will stop, hopefully, right? And they turn around and they go the other way. And that's kind of what happened on this one. They'd shot on the downslope of the road and shot off there and end up like, oh no, we don't like this. Turned around about 100 yards down. They turned around and went back up on the top side of the road. And they went up and were going and went over this ridge top. The ridge top was from where the road was on that mountain. It's probably about 600-700 yards to that ridge top. And it's pretty steep country over in my part of western Montana. And so we're like, man, we're gonna have to find a way in to get to those dogs, because we lost our comms with them. And me, I'm always kind of a little extra cautious. I'm like, man, I don't like being out of comms with the dogs. Let's hurry up. And so got all my buddies in the truck, and we drove over to a gated road that took us into that draw, the adjacent draw to us. And we had comms initially on our hike in, and there's we kind of went around this bend, and let me back up there. When we got to the gate and had communication with the dogs, they were treeing right in the bottom of this draw. Real thick, darker draw, tons of tree, right? There's no clear cut, no commercial thins in this draw. So it was really thick just draw.
Big timber.
Yep. And any roads that went in there were gated all year round, right? So keep that in mind. But the dogs were treed, barking like crazy. And by the time we went around this bend, kind of lost some comms with them for about 10 minutes. At the time we went around that bend and got our comms back, those dogs that we had on the tree were spaced out 150 to 100 yards apart from each other in silent, dead silent. And so, me trying to be an optimist, I was telling my buddy, well, maybe they're on, a sow and cubs or something, just trying to maintain some kind of optimism. Well, that optimism quickly dissipated when I was starting to find fresh wolf sign on the gated road I was on hiking into the dogs. And, the further we got in, the more wolf sign I was, finding, still not hearing dogs, and I got about 200 yards from where my dogs were and not hearing them at all. I started sprinting down to the dogs. And the very first dog I came up on was that pup trainer Tink that we've been talking about, and she was just lying there stretched. A wolf pack had came in and got all the dogs on that tree. My two dogs, Tink and Stormy, that blue tick I'd mentioned, she was just a pup, and then three of my buddies' dogs. So they came through there, and it was a bigger pack too, because we had let go of 12 dogs on that race, and 5 ended up dead, and 3 ended up injured.
Dang.
And the rest of them ended up, scared pretty bad. So it wasn't definitely not a good way to finish, a bear hunt, but. It was also kind of, it kind of, in a way, there was some learning, even though learning to be had, even though it was a really, really kind of horrific moment for me and my buddies.
Yeah.
It was kind of a cautionary tale to just when you can't, I know in the springtime it's hard, to kind of look for wolf sign, but always just kind of obviously keep that thought in your head that especially if you're hunting in wolf country, right? I mean, if you're not hunting in Montana, you're more concerned about losing a dog getting run over, a bear getting a hold of a dog, right? Well, those are all hazards of running hounds over here, but we got an extra one, a wolf. And and it's just kind of one of those things where you're just like, man, sometimes in hindsight's 2020, right? You never know, and you can't beat yourself up when you lose dogs in a situation like that, because we'd treat bear around that area, just not that specific draw. We'd treat a ton of bear over there, and so you just don't know when or where you'll run into wolves. But it happens, and they're not just stories that here. I mean, and here I am, so a novice, right? I had the mentality.
That's a rough spot, man.
Those old timers, I've never seen a wolf in all these races. I've treated all these bears, and not ran into one wolf, even in areas where there's wolf sign. Well, that kind of thinking eventually caught up to me, and I found out the hard way that they're, these hazards that houndsmen continue to warn other houndsmen of are very real and are something that you really do need to consider. And that was just kind of a really tough lesson for me, was that, the advice people give out to you, definitely take it. 'Cause oftentimes, it's worth at least considering, and in that situation, it definitely was. So, and another thing too,
and that's an extreme high and low.
Oh, yeah.
To go through that season and be at that level, I mean, it's an incredible first season. When you were talking numbers on the phone the other day, I'm thinking, okay, novice, he's getting out a couple times a week, maybe. Mm-hmm. A guy who catches 10 bear in that season. I mean, that's doing really well.
Yeah.
Where you set, we all have to set our own bar, and my bar is going to be different than the next guy's. And the hard part is holding true to that, knowing when we're falling short of that on our end, and knowing when we need to push harder too. But I think the numbers game people get so wrapped up on, and like you said, even you're setting a different goal. The goal shifted from exposing those dogs to bears and building a pack and building everything on that to 21, 22, 23. I totally been there. You know, when it's a tough spot, and it unfortunately it takes big things to make you realize that. In the beginning, small adjustments make big movements. When you start the ball rolling, man, it takes something pretty big to get your attention when you're feeling on top of the world.
Oh man. Yeah. And I mean, now, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to take the positive out of what happened. Right. And that to me is right now, like, as a novice hunter, go back to the basics. I got some pups now again, right? I have 3 finished dogs, and they'll still catch bear just fine. But I'm going back to the basics. Why I'm doing this, right? And that's because for me it's the love of the chase. I love watching the passion that each one of these dogs have, because it just feeds my passion for what I do. So it's going back to realizing why I love running dogs, right? And then also the whole training aspect. The reason why I started listening to these podcasts was because the information I heard on training new pups, and just that kind of information was fascinating to me. And I love trying to apply that myself. And as a novice, that's hard to do, but I like that challenge. And so, like, now I'm finding myself, okay, on my day off, or I'm going to devote a 30 to 45 minute time frame to training these 2 different puppies individually, right, after work. And so that's kind of I've shifted gears now to where I'm not like, I'm going to take out my finished dogs, in which I still take them out and maybe we'll try to find a coon or something like that just to work them, right? But I'm really kind of shifting gears back to where I was originally, right? So in a way, I was kind of humbled.
Full circle, real
season.
quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's wild, man. I mean, in some ways, though, like, be thankful it all happened in 1 year. I mean, really, you probably learned more this year than most people get an opportunity to do in several, just because of opportunities.
Yep.
But I mean, the story, and this has gone kind of how I had it in my head, man. Like, I feel like this is gonna connect with somebody. There's one person out there this is gonna hit home with, that's really on that brink of giving this up. I will tell you, 9 out of 10 people I know that have given this up, all they did was take a break.
Yep.
If it's in you, it's in you, and it's going to be in you. It may be a 5-year break. It may be 10 years. It may be 20. I've got guys that are getting back into this in their 70s I've talked to. They haven't coon hunted since they were a kid, but now they have time and they want to go do something and get out of the house. And man, more power to you. That is such a cool story to hear.
Yeah.
Because it's that love for the dogs and the draw to it of what we do.
Right. And here's the thing with what we do, the biggest thing you have to be okay with, at least to me, right? My opinion is the unpredictability of what we do, right? Because there are so many factors that you can't control. And that was a big thing for me. And I experienced that firsthand, right? Things that are out of your realm of control, right? Like I had no idea there was wolves in that drop.
High risk, right? Low frequency.
Yeah.
Go back to Stefan's podcast. Yeah. We'll throw our shameless plug in there for you, bud.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. That's it. And I think another thing, my biggest takeaway from all this too was just always go back to the basics. I feel like if you're ever kind of you hit a rough spot, go back to the basics. Seek counsel from like-minded guys too. That's been huge for me. Guys that understand and have been there are the people you need to talk to. That's what's helped me through all this too. It's just finding people like that, telling yourself what you already know in your heart to be true, right? Which is I don't. It's just being realistic with yourself and your expectations.
Yeah.
And that from this point on, that's going to be kind of what I do, and going to keep me sane, hopefully.
That's a good approach, man, because I really do feel like the training that happens with these dogs, it is not one-sided. I mean, I've learned more from my dogs than I have from 90% of people on this planet. But with that, I'm trying to think of the right words. This is such a cool topic that we've got to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just really enjoyed it because it really hit home with me and the denial that I went through for years and the face that, I put on when I felt like I had to perform under pressure. And when I finally started having fun with it again, thanks to Sonny Turner, out watching an 80-year-old man dancing in the middle of the road while they're burning up a fox, man, it took it from, I got to get this number, the next number, the next number. I got to show this, I got to do that. And it got fun again. Man, it's the same thing you're talking about. You go back to the basics, just like with these dogs, the pups. The whole point of training is consistency and setting that foundation so you can default. That's where they're going to go in a panic situation. It's, muscle memory or brain memory, however you want to say it. You revert back to your lowest level of preparedness, right? So to me, that's where we've got to learn too, and I think your objectiveness and really watching is what kept you in that. Like you definitely, I feel like, are going down the right path. And I'm just really hoping I hope this connects with someone, man. I'm telling you, someone needs to hear this in the hound world right now.
Oh, absolutely.
And it has been a great conversation. If you're open to it, bud, I would love to touch base with you again sometime and see how this progression goes, because you're in a whole new world now. Like coming back after getting a dog killed, that's rough. And that's usually when a lot of these guys that I've talked with, they pull the plug.
Yeah.
It's a rough hurdle to get over. I would love to touch base with you again, Aaron. This has been killer.
Yeah, I would. I'll definitely love to talk to you again about all this. Hopefully, what I'm telling you is something that I can actually apply, right? Because it's one thing to talk on it, but it's a whole other thing to apply what you're trying to do, and so I'm gonna give it my best shot, and I'll continue to. One big thing I do, one really important thing I do is constantly touch bases with other houndsmen. Like, hey man, I'm trying this with this pup and it's just not working. Am I doing something? Is this on me? Probably, but is this on me? And doing a lot of that, especially as a novice like myself, has really helped me. Right, and especially it's helped me right now with the pups that I got going on. I've constantly referred to some pretty big names around here: Brad Jones, Joe Bebo. Those are big houndsmen. Adeline Richardson in Western Montana that really know what they're doing. So I'm just fortunate, and here's one thing I will say. I know we're getting a little long here.
We're good.
To those novices out there, like don't be afraid to reach out and don't be afraid to come across as not knowing that much, right? Because I am that person that doesn't know much, and I will be the first though to tell anybody I don't know much. Help me out here. What am I doing wrong? And that has helped me though learn so much. The little I do know, it's from that, right? And I'm still continuing to piece the puzzle together, right? So I would just encourage people to ask questions and not have too much pride, or your dogs do well, if they start doing well, also remember where you came from too, because that was another thing. I was right there. I was one of those people. Oh, my dogs are so much better than these guys, or you just got to be careful. When you start experiencing that success, remember that your dogs can still make liars of you any day. So
any day. No, you hit it on the head, man. And I would say, like, the questions, send them to us. I mean, I know all of our podcast contributors are constantly getting questions. I mean, that's kind of how we got hooked up in the beginning, was just conversations about the podcast and some training. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Give us a call, send us an email. You know, we'd be happy to, and maybe even get you on as a listener. You know, hop on here with us and let's kind of dissect and dive into it a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would just really encourage people. I mean, if we're giving out plugs here, if this episode hits home, share it with somebody, because I guarantee if you are relating to this, like I think most of us have been there, send that on to somebody who you know is going to need that encouragement. It might be easier to take in this form than, you know, conversations sometimes can get tough. I would encourage you guys, share this around, leave a review if you can. I mean, that'd be great too. But to me, getting this out for somebody, if we can keep one person in our sport because they didn't give up when really they have everything in the making to be that lifetime role model for someone else, or to be a good representation for us when it comes to the general public. I mean, that's what we need to be breeding and harvesting within our groups. So
absolutely,
man, thanks again, Aaron. That was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jason. I had a lot of fun today.
Awesome, man. Well, we'll touch base here real soon.
All right, sounds good.